You know, when ethnic studies first disrupted the academy in the late 1960s and early 1970s, it functioned, Black studies, Chicana studies, American Indian studies, feminist studies. It disrupted an academy which had been profoundly purged from the task and mission of social justice. There's a new book, a book that was published last year called, I think, Surveillance, is that? And it records the consequence of the Reagan administration as governor of California of the UC system, right? The attempt, which was very successful in many ways, to get the president of the university, who was Clark Kerr at the time, to purge those professors who were not reactionary. All right? So the normativity of the academy in the 1960s was a normativity which had been achieved by the Cold War, and as you mentioned about genetic testing, you all understand the GREs, the SATs, the LSATs, etc., are all genetically based. Right? They emerged from the eugenics movement of the 1920s and 1930s. And almost all of us are, to a certain degree, participants in some of that. When you eat cereal with the name Kellogg on it, right? So cornflakes is like Coca-Cola and many other things in the world of our consumption, which has a bizarre and vicious history. But in any case, Ford, Carnegie, the college achievement and academic performance testing, etc. All of these were wrapped around the notion that those of us who had good genes should be subsidized, and those of us who didn't have good genes should be, in effect, allowed to perish. So remember that we came into the academy in the 1960s and began for a moment to redeem it. But as you said, Dorothy, that period of redemption is now under enormous threat by the incorporation, the further incorporation of the academy. Now, it is possible to look around this room and to see the consequences of what's been happening the last 50 years in terms of the intervention of ethnic studies and critical ethnic studies at that. But I have to reiterate what the three of you said so before me, that we are not possible without, in effect, the encouragement, the urgency, and the requirement that we be here by those who are, in fact, being trampled on, being imprisoned, etc. You know that 6 or 7 years ago, the New York Times put out that stunning statistic about the number of people incarcerated in this country. A statistic which went like this, and Michelle Alexander, among others, has reiterated it. Would we have something like 5% of the world's population? And something like 25% of the world's imprisoned. And the only reason that that issue was being raised by people like our U.S. Attorney General, Holden, etc., is because it's too costly. It's a budget issue. All right? In our county jails and city jails, 80 to 85% of inmates have not been convicted of anything. They are awaiting trial, awaiting their convictions, etc. So we have this immense example of how urgent our work has become. And we can look at this in terms of unemployment, we can look at this in terms of poverty, we can look at this in terms of those who are unemployed, etc. All right? So critical ethnic studies is not merely about the academy. It never was. Right? We can be preoccupied with dissertations, tenure, professors, etc., etc. But you understand what would be the consequences of all of us succeeding, and in effect, the next generation see further developments, further expansions of incarceration. We would be eventually under threat ourselves, as we are currently. So we have to watch our language. I've seen a lot of material related to a post-racial society. That's something I can't anticipate. Right? It's not here. Right? It has never been here. Right? And one of the things that we are attempting to achieve is a sense of how that can be acquired. How we can end racial capital. And several of the sessions that I've attended the last 2 days indicate that there is, to a certain extent, a sensibility, a real sensibility about that. All right? I was going to say in my opening remarks, about an hour ago I was asked about what were the spiritual bases of my work. And I told my interrogator that one of the things I recall is this. I grew up in several Christian traditions. We were kind of marginal in a way. For example, we worshipped on Saturday rather than on Sunday, et cetera, et cetera. But one of the things I was exposed to was this immense notion of the possible through the construction of the notion of faith, right? So Christian faith trained me to be able to believe in, to anticipate something coming into being which was not in being. All right? That's called, by the Greek term, utopia, which means the good society. It also means no society, no such place. So that gave me a framework for looking at what others before me had imagined was possible in their lifetimes. And that's one of the reasons why it was so important for me to look at the notion of radicalism from the vantage point of the slaves. The slaves, we would expect, as some scholars have indicated, the slaves we would expect to have no ambitions except to perhaps live or perhaps to die, right? They had experienced social death. Well, that's nonsense. Because they were something more than what was expected of them, they could invent, manufacture, conspire, and organize way beyond the possibilities. I was talking to some students in the sociology department at UC Santa Barbara about the work that a sociologist named John Cruz had done on the spirituals. And John Cruz says that of the spirituals in the 19th century before the Civil War, most white people heard that and thought it was only noise. All right? What is the noise of 2013? That's what we have to excavate. And I'm so pleased to be in your midst because I know that some of you, many of you, are doing that. Record the noise.